Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby, and I am so excited to have my guest this week. And oh my god, I realize I say that a lot, and I say it almost all the time because I always love. I have fabulous people to talk to, fabulous women especially to talk to. But Lisa is a person who, like, if you ever look at her Facebook page, it's like, oh my gosh, like I think a very interesting life, and I'm really excited to ask her questions about what she's up to now, her travels, her experiences. I always like to tell people how I meet people because I just find it amazing how we end up connecting, and people may go out of our lives and then they may come back in, or they may introduce you to people. I think it's fantastic. So I do stand-up comedy. I went to a Lehigh Valley stand-up women were having kind of like a casual get together a few years ago in Wegmans Cafe there, just to kind of bounce ideas, because it's great to have support no matter what you're into. But this happened to be for comedy, sharing ideas, joke writing, just being supportive, offering creative ideas and support. And Lisa, that's how I met Lisa. And I've seen her since. We've both done a couple different comedy shows together. That's how I met Lisa. Lisa is in the Lehigh Valley area, or at least she was. We'll find out where she's at now. But I'm in Scranton. I met Lisa in the Lehigh Valley area, and Lisa goes all over the place. So without me talking anymore, without further ado, welcome, Lisa. So glad to have you.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
So I don't even know. It's funny, when I was prepping for this, I usually have a general sense of what I want to focus on. And I do want to talk about, you've done clowning very recently with Patch Adams, but I really want to talk about, to me, you have a very interesting life. Truly. You have done some
Thank
very
you.
unique jobs. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think I kind of do some interesting things, but when I look at your post, I'm like, what is going on now? I don't even know, but it's always with joy. You always look joyful, I will say. So
Thank
I
you.
mean, you do so many different interesting fun things. But before we get to the clowning, let me ask you, because I mean, people may not know about this. I didn't know about it until I actually did hear about it before you. But one day I was watching, I think, something on the news, and I think it was in
Mhm.
either Oregon or California, like West Coast, where things happen before they
Yeah,
happen East Coast, about
sure.
cuddling. People were like professional cuddlers who they showed on the news, they were cuddling. And I thought, well, that's interesting. At first, of course, my negative brain was like, oh my god, that's weird. And like, oh, don't tell me that doesn't get like funky or whatever. Like, who lays next to someone and cuddles? That's weird. But I understand the science behind it, more or less. But I never knew someone who did it. And then I realized that you've done it. And I don't know if you still do, but could you tell us a little bit about what that is, what that's like, and if you still do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been at it for, it'll be 8 years in February, that I've been snuggling professionally. And it's been not like a major focus in my life lately. Like, I haven't been getting a lot of requests, which is fine. But it is the work I feel that I was born to do. And the way that I got into it was, I wanted like a side hustle because I wasn't making enough money at the job that I had at the time. And I read an article about like 100 ways to make money on the side, or something that you've never heard of, something like that. And it was on the list, and it has since disappeared from the list. um, but I was like, oh my God, that's the job that I was born for. Like, there have been so many situations in life where I've wanted to snuggle with someone and they've taken it the wrong way and thought that I wanted to do more than snuggle, and it's caused drama. Like, this would be a way for me to follow that instinct and help people who do want that and make money at the same time. Um, and it's been a really, really wonderful thing in my life. It's introduced me to so many people that I would never meet otherwise. I'm actually sitting in the parking lot of my job right now, and I got the square job that I have currently because a snuggle client knew that I was looking for a new job and told me about working here. And so I
Oh,
applied and got hired, and now I'm a taste tester for a large alcohol company.
okay. So we're
Uh,
not even finished with one interesting job, and you're taking
yeah.
us to another.
Um,
Okay.
but it's just like been such a blessing as far as like getting to know people who come from completely different walks of life than I have, and helping them meet a need and just have like an hour or two or whatever they've paid for of just very cool, genuine, chilled out connection. And I often leave feeling as refreshed as they do, which is pretty great as well.
So,
Yeah.
and then we'll move on. But
Mhm.
professional snuggling, and I know you had mentioned somebody, there is that it could happen where someone is taking it in a direction it shouldn't go in, but snuggling is meant to be
Yeah.
kind of like the idea of kind of like spooning or an embrace, right? So you're having just the feeling of someone connecting with you. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's a platonic thing. Yeah, like you lay down on a bed and whatever position strikes you as comfortable. A lot of spooning. You'd be surprised how many people want to be the little spoon, because I snuggle men.
Okay.
And like gender roles tells us that the woman is the small spoon, but they more often than you would think want to be the small spoon. And I think it's cool that it's a safe place for them to like admit that and experience it. And I think that that's progress for the world to recognize that.
And so, I mean,
Um,
obviously you do meet some guys that are being creepy or shady, but like, how is it difficult to create that trust right away though, if people that you haven't met, like in the beginning, if it's the first time?
Not typically. It's not difficult to establish whether or not you're on the same page ahead of time, because it is like they find me through websites that are specifically for cuddling. And those websites have measures in place, like the messaging systems on those websites are monitored, and you have to like check a box saying you understand the rules every month the first time that you log in for that month. And so I always speak to everyone on the phone ahead of time. And if they ask any inappropriate questions or insinuate anything, I tell them no thanks. And then I immediately go report them. This is the one thing in life where I am a stickler for the rules. So I don't run into trouble anywhere near as often as you would think in person. Usually it gets dealt with before that.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
And you said it's not so much a focus anymore. You've done it for several years,
Mhm.
but so, and
Yeah.
I know from your posts, I've seen you dressed in character. You've been in parades, you've been in theme parks. So you do like all kinds
Yes.
of entertainment and performance. And now this job is, I have to ask before we move on to the Patch Adams. So you get to
Mhm.
taste alcohol for like pay right now?
Yeah, that's my current square job. Like I come to work every day and we have to like memorize the profiles of different beverages, and then we drink them and then we rate them, and then as a group we talk about if there's something wrong with them, and then it's on to the next. So yeah, that's my current job, and I am only here because I snuggled with someone who needed it. And we talked about how I was back in the area and needed a job. And he was like, oh, well, I just got this internal email and here I am. So you never know, like you were saying in the beginning, you never know how you'll meet people or where it will take you.
I totally
It's a
believe in
cool
that.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah,
love that part of life because it's great. I think, and how you can help other people. Like he helped you find a job, but that happens all the time. I love that. Yeah. Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to ask, I don't know if it would be a silly or immature question. Do you ever get drunk from tasting at work, or or is it just a
No,
minimal amount?
it's very, very minimal. What we drink each day, and this is over the span of several hours, wouldn't amount to more than a drink or two collectively. Like they're tiny little samples. And even most of that tiny little sample will get dumped because you don't need the whole thing to figure out whatever you need to look for usually. Um, there have been a couple times where we have one of our higher proof drinks that I'm like, all right, I need a minute, but like I've never been drunk. It's just been like, okay, it's time for a Rice Krispie. Like, just give me a minute here. Yeah. It's
Well,
never been anything crazy. But
well,
I
and you
get
do
lots of
need,
free alcohol that I get to take home and
oh,
I
you
get drunk with
do.
that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool. That's a nice feature, a
Yeah.
nice perk. Do you
Yes.
need like a palate cleanser in between the different? I'm sure they probably make sure that you know, have enough time in between trying
Yes.
different things.
Yeah, we're not allowed to like do anything with our mouths. That sounded funny. Like 30 minutes prior to getting here. That sounded like so much, but we're not like there's no chewing gum or drinking coffee or anything like that 30 minutes before our shift starts. And the only things that we can have other than the product while we're on is unsalted crackers and water. And on a rare occasion, if we're able to take a longer break, or if you really need it because you're feeling it, we have some, they call them sensory neutral snacks, like things that are pretty tasteless, like a Rice Krispie treat. That'll dissipate pretty quickly.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
I've learned something new today. Sensory neutral snacks. Now that's interesting.
Yeah. It means they're boring and don't have much taste, but they'll soak up whatever alcohol you need them to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Um, One of the other things we talked about before I hit record. So I definitely want to
Mhm.
get to the funny stuff, but we're going to kind of leave that. That's going to be the bulk of what I want to talk about, comedy and your clowning with Patch Adams. But what is it?
Yeah.
You mentioned something to do with cults. And is it, I think were you doing research? I know that you write a lot. You have blog articles and you're working on a book. What is it, cult research that you've been doing? Or do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that kind of segues into comedy perfectly. So, you know from hanging out in the Lehigh Valley from time to time about Steel Stacks Arts Quest. That's like a big comedy venue in the Lehigh Valley. They asked me to do a one-woman show. The distinction between a one-woman show and comedy being that you're not obligated to get a laugh every 10 seconds or whatever. You can focus more on storytelling or whatever you need to without that obligation. And so, sorry, I just like had an awkward pause. So they asked me about doing a one-woman show, and I went in and we had a meeting, and they had wanted me to do it about cuddling, and I nixed that right away. So we were talking about what else it could be about, and we had just organically started talking about cults. And I think it was about like I had a picture with my Mormon underwear or something. Mormons wear special underwear, but I have some, and I of course posted about it on Facebook because I'm obnoxious. And so we're talking about, Mormon underwear, and then I'm like, also I went to see the Moonies recently, and then it occurred to us like, oh, Lisa loves to visit cults. The show should be about cults. So they kind of gave me like official permission to visit as many cults as I want and make it a priority and make it a respectable thing. So I do that now. I
Okay.
visit lots of cults.
Okay, I'm going to stop you for a second because I have two questions. So, one, I need to
Yeah.
know, or I'm curious about the underwear, the description of the underwear. And then you're saying cult. So, is that
Mhm.
we're not calling them religion, right? It's not, or is that by choice for you that you referring to them as cults
Um,
or?
you can call them both. Not all cults are religious. Like they can be political, they can be business, they can be all sorts of things. I personally would never like publicly or officially label any group a cult because it's an inherently pejorative term. Like nobody calls a group a cult um neutrally. Like if you were to say to a friend who's in a group that's causing trouble, you're in a cult, that's going to shut down any problem solving that might happen. So because you can't really define it because it is an inherently pejorative term, the best you can do is look at, well, these are groups that are called cults and they have these characteristics. How many boxes does this group check? So I prefer to say that groups are culty or cultish,
Okay.
depending on how many of those boxes they check. But in a not on stage conversation like this, I would just say generally, I visit cults, and some of those groups are far more culty than others.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I focus on religious ones. So
Okay.
yeah.
And what is so what does Mormon underwear look like? Is it, are we I'm picturing big pantaloons or something. I don't know.
It's the best, Janine. So like it's evolved through the years. It used to be like essentially a onesie minus the footies on the bottom. But now they're usually a two-piece. The one I have is a one piece. But they're like old school underwear that come to like, depending on your build, like around your knee, maybe slightly below, maybe slightly above, and then like a short sleeve as well. And the idea is that if they're wearing that under their clothes, I mean, it has like more of a mystical spiritual meaning for them too, that it's like being wrapped in God's love and protection. But the idea is that if they're wearing those and their clothes are covering the Mormon underwear, then that's like meeting their standard of modest dress.
Okay. Okay. And
Yeah.
so when you're visiting, so are you traveling like all across the country? Are these like in the area, like on the East Coast that you happen to find? And so I have so many questions. How do you find them? How welcoming have they been? All that stuff.
Well, cults are very welcoming. Like if you're looking to like feel cherished and welcomed and have a good meal, visit a cult, because they will roll out the red carpet for you. And that's because cults love visitors, because visitors might become members. Um, so with few exceptions, they're usually pretty keen for you to come and hear about whatever it is that they're willing to admit to outsiders or prospects.
Okay.
Um, I've I've visited groups like this. To say all over the world would be dramatic, but all over the US, not all of it specifically for the show. Quite a bit of it happened just for my own joy prior to that conversation. Um, a lot of them have been on the East Coast. About a year ago, I did like a month-long almost cult driving extravaganza and went to lots of places.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what is the end point? Like, is there so like a plan of when this will all come together as a show? Or is this kind of just we'll see what happens?
Yeah, we finally set a date a few weeks ago. So it's going to be in January of 2024, January 19th and 20th. So I've got a little more than a year, probably a year by the time anyone's hearing this, to get my affairs in order. But it's been not quite 2 years already since the initial conversation was had. So I needed time to like visit cults and like be like, okay, am I going back to that one, or am I like at the end of the line with them? Like, is that as far as that story's going? And then processing the very overstimulating experiences that you have when you visit cults and everything as well. So I'm finally like at the point where I'm like, okay, this story makes it in, this story doesn't, but I can mention this part of it, and I'm like working on outlining it now. So get in there slowly
That's
but surely.
awesome. Will it sounds like it's going to be really interesting. Is it going to be like multimedia? Because I'm sure you have tons of photos, or is it more you telling the stories from you, just from you orally, like verbally?
It'll definitely be multimedia. I would be very content to just sit on stage with a PowerPoint presentation. But I think they want a little more theatrics than that, a little more stage presence. So that's something I need to work on. But yeah, there will be pictures. There'll probably be video as well. I've got a few outfits that I've collected through the visits that I hope to make time to change in and out of. I'd like it to be somewhat immersive. Like I'd like to like open the doors early and have like tables around the room where you can see all of the propaganda that I've collected and everything, and pick them up and read the pamphlets and stuff before the show gets started.
Very cool. And let me ask you, so among them, did you have like something that really struck you, like that you, I don't want to say that you liked, but that you felt connected to? And did you really connect with a lot of the people?
I, and I think that this is something that you share, am all about unlikely moments of connection with people. I feel like you exemplify that with your podcast and all the interesting people that you bring on here. And I'm a huge fan of that as well. And can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I want to make sure I answer it correctly
Oh
instead
no,
of
I was going to
rambling.
say, did you feel like, so kind of like two part? One, did you feel
Mhm.
especially connected to any particular cult? And then what kind of like relationships did you form? Like, are you going to, did you feel like you'd keep in touch with anybody? Did you feel like almost like creating a lifelong friend, or at least a friend for now? Like, what was that experience as far as the connection?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that there was more or less of a connection with any particular group. Um, but probably my best example of like an ongoing relationship would be Mormons. I went out, I wanted to tour a Mormon temple, and you can only do that when they're built or when they're being renovated. And then they'll have an open house before they rededicate it, and it goes back to being super duper private and members only. Um, so I went out to Idaho to tour a temple, and I stayed with a Mormon family while I was there, and they were absolutely lovely. You might call what they were doing love bombing, but they really rolled out the red carpet for me. They made sure that I got my own private tour. They took me around to see lots of things. And we have kept in touch. We send Christmas cards. I occasionally, if I go to another Mormon related something, I'll send a picture to the father in that family and be like, look where I went today. Um, so we're definitely still in touch. They were lovely, lovely people. And branching out of that, they of course sent Mormon missionaries to my house. Like that was an inevitability. And so these Mormon missionary girls come to my house last year, and I told them, you know, now's not a good time. I'm in the middle of something, but take my number, and we'll definitely talk. And I've met up with them, I think like 4 times to just like eat food and chat. Um, like I've had them over for dinner. At one point, I took a charcuterie board and we sat in like the conference room at their church after hours and just giggled and stuff. And they ask me about the cults that I visited, and they tell me about missionary life. And I think it's really nice for them to have an adult outside of their faith who they know cares. And that like if they ever felt mentally ready, they could reach out to me if they needed to. Um, but that's been like one very cool instance of unlikely connection that's come out of it, because they're used to people slamming the door in their face all the time. They're not used to like, oh, yeah, you should come back for dinner next week. So that's been a cool thing to be able to connect with them in that way.
Very cool. Well, I think you'd have to be, and obviously you are, someone who's not judgmental or predisposed, because to understand these folks, or to get like to allow them to be who they are, and you to kind of absorb that or take that in. Would you agree? Because I mean, you just seem like you can talk to anyone and kind of accept, or at least get along with anyone.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm definitely a people person. I think sometimes I'm maybe not judgmental enough, but not discerning enough, maybe. Like maybe I should not just assume that everyone I talk to is my best buddy pal in this moment sometimes. But for the most part, it's a nice way to operate.
Yeah, I was going to say you get certain people, what I would think would feel more open, and able to open up to you because of the way you approach it.
Totally. And I think it's important to walk through life like with an open mind, and to very stubbornly look for the good in people, while not ignoring the bad, and to be like prepared to love at any given moment. That sounded hippy dippy, but
no, but it was powerful. I mean, be stubbornly, I like what you said, because it's so easy. I mean, for myself, I'll say I'm seeing the negative so much in the news, and even just out, like when I'm out running, people don't want to stop at stop signs. They go through like crosswalks,
right.
and I'm always cursing and screaming. But it's harder for me to take the moments where I'm like, okay, let's remember the good. And then when I have to see the good, I love it, but it's a practice. It's a practice for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I want to punch people in the face sometimes too. I honk my horn a lot.
Okay. All right. So we got that. So you recently went, and I'm so curious because this isn't your first time. You have traveled with, for anybody who hasn't, I mean, everyone I think should be familiar with Patch Adams. Robin Williams played in the movie years ago. That was
Mhm.
probably where most people got to understand what clowning was and what Patch Adams was all
Yeah,
about, which I love because I do laughter yoga. So this whole idea of humor and laughter to help people be happy and to feel good. But tell me about how you first got involved in that, like how you met Patch Adams, and you've been traveling. I know you traveled recently, and tell us about the travels. But first, how and when did you get started working with Patch Adams?
totally. Yeah. So when I was little when that movie came out, and most people from my generation will tell you that they have like a fatherly love for Robin Williams because it was the 90s and he was making a lot of family friendly movies where he was a benevolent, loving dad, Mrs. Doubtfire, Hook, all those movies. So when I saw commercials for Patch Adams, I was like, sign me up. And I went to see it and I was like obsessed immediately. Like, I need to get this video on VHS and I need to watch it all the time because it's Robin Williams and he's this guy who calls wrong phone numbers and sneaks into hospitals and messes with people. Like, this is something I'm hot for. And I don't remember at what age I found out that Patch was a real person and that this wasn't just like a movie. Um, but when I did find out at whatever age that was, I was like, I'm going to track that guy down when I'm old enough. And he is easily tracked down. He answers every piece of mail that he gets. So literally anyone can write to him and he will respond. And the first time we met in person, he was giving a talk at Kutztown University. My sister went there at the time, so she got tickets and we went, and I had written him ahead of time to be like, hey, I'm going to be there. I want to shake your hand. And he called me and was like, come find me after. And I was like 20, I think, and like, Patch Adams called me. Ah! And so that was the first time we met in person. And I think at that point, it was like already arranged that I would be going to Russia with him because you just go to the website and save your pennies and you sign up. And I had decided to do that a few years earlier. But yeah, well, this is different now that COVID has happened, but pre-COVID, he would go on a handful of clown trips every year to different countries. And as long as you have the money and you're like capable of doing it, you can sign up and you can go and have a truly incredible experience. So I went to Russia with him when I was 21 and Costa Rica a couple years after that, and then Mexico a few years after that. And then I was supposed to go to Morocco with him in 2020. And then the world shut down like a week or so before we were supposed to leave. I had already like pulled out my clown clothes and was ready to like start sorting them and put them in a suitcase when it got canceled. But that trip finally happened a few weeks ago. I got back from Morocco very recently. So it finally happened.
So with all, I've again so many questions. So you do have to pay, yourself, for yourself. Do they help
Yes.
out with housing at all? Because I would imagine they want people housed together while you're there.
Yeah, it's like a very inclusive thing for what you pay. The you pay for your flight separately because people are coming from all over, and if you want to stay longer, you can do that or arrive early or whatever. But your meals are paid for. You get picked up at the airport. Whatever touristy things are being incorporated into the trip, that's included. Getting around and wherever we're staying is also included in that. So it's like you're at an all-inclusive clown resort.
That's great because you're doing
Not
good, but
really.
you also get to enjoy stuff for yourself. Do they have any like special criteria? Like, so let's say you mentioned your clown clothes. So as far as training, or somebody who just says, hey, I just like being silly, so I'm going to bring an outfit and put on some makeup. Is there any, like, do you have to have any training or any certain criteria that he sets?
Not at all. He'll tell you the oldest person to come on a clown trip was in their 90s and the youngest was 5. You don't have to have, I had never clowned before when I went to Russia. I only really clown on these trips. I like to think that I've incorporated clowning into my lifestyle, regardless of having a red nose on. But yeah, there are people who sign up for these trips who are actual like birthday party clowns or performer clowns. And then there are people like me who are just like, yeah, I'll go snuggle some orphans. Like, so it runs the gamut of people. A lot of people who work in the medical field sign up because he's a doctor and they want to like inject their work with compassion. A lot of performery type people sign up. People who watched the movie and were into that. People who want to travel. It's all sorts of people. Some have never clowned before. Some do it all the time. It's anyone.
So when you get there, because I'm thinking there must be some kind, I don't want to say a program, but is there like visits scheduled to, like you had mentioned, orphanages, hospitals, out in the street? Is there kind of like a schedule to what's expected, like where and when you'll clown?
Yes, and they will always tell you you have to be flexible on a clown trip because things change. But yeah, you have a rough idea of your schedule before you get there. Like the first night, you're going to have a welcome dinner, and the next day, you're going to go to this hospital, and in the afternoon, you'll do this activity or whatever. Yeah, you have a rough idea of what will be happening before you get there. And sometimes it changes, sometimes it follows it to a T. But you know like where you're going to be.
And what does the clowning then look like? Let's say there's like a bunch of you. Are you all just like each maybe talking to a couple of kids and just like trying to be silly and get them to laugh? Like what's the how do they present the agenda to you, or the goal, I should say, just to give you some kind of guidance or instruction if you were going for the first time?
It looks different in every scenario and in every moment, one to the next. If you want to show up and be a person who just hammers out animal balloons or balloon animals, you can do that. If you want to be a person who just chases kids around and then they chase you, you can be that person. If you have an actual clown show that you know how to do, knock yourself out. If you've got magic tricks, if you come loaded down with bubbles and stickers and press-on tattoos, or if you just want to go in and make faces at people, or you've got an accordion or a ukulele and you can provide the soundtrack to all of this, it looks different in every situation. Like, because if you go to, like, say, an orphanage, it might be a situation where they just bring all of the kids into the courtyard and hell breaks loose. Or you might go to like a juvenile place or a prison or something where they're like, okay, we can't be quite as wild here because these people are a little more difficult. Or if they have like special needs in some way, they'll give you a heads up, like you're going to want to read the room before you touch anybody or whatever. Or if you're in like a hospital ward where people are in casts, like be gentle, maybe don't touch people. what have you. And then there's cultural things to take into consideration there too, depending where you are. But it looks different. There, like, if you want to just like walk around with a sock puppet and just like be in people's faces the whole time, you can do that, or you can rope 20 kids into playing tag. It's truly like wherever the spirit leads you.
So very playful for
It can be
sure.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have like a few really solid anecdotes from Morocco that might paint a picture for just how different situations can be. The first day we went to an orphanage, and there's a bunch of us, and they're going to bring the kids out, but they're not there yet. And right in front of where we're going to be hanging out, there's a classroom full of toddlers. So a few of us wander in there while we wait for all of the other kids to arrive. And these kids immediately start crying. Like they all just burst into tears. Adorable, but also hilarious. And the lady in charge explained to us later, like, that happened because these kids were all born during COVID and they've never had entertainment come in before. Like, you're the first live entertainment they've ever had. So they were just like, what the hell are these white people with red noses? Like, it was just like terrifying for them. But like, you know, you eventually win them over because you clown their teachers and you play with their toys and get them to play with you. And next thing you know, they're blowing your bubbles or whatever. And there was one little cutie pie who I picked her up. And at this point, there's bigger kids around and there's more clowns doing stuff with them. And we were just like surveying the scene. Like, we're just watching. I'm holding her and we're watching. And this other little girl comes up and she wants me to hold her too. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to need to sit down then because I can't hold them both. And we just sat there and watched pretty much the whole time. And occasionally someone would come by and be like, here's a balloon for you or whatever. And then another kid would come and sit on my lap. And it was just like a revolving door of little orphan cutie pies sitting on my lap. And that's what clowning was for me that day. Like, it wasn't an especially goofy day. My proudest goofy clowning moment from this trip, we were at a place for, I guess, like women who are in distress, who also have children. So like they take care of the kids and the women can take classes that'll help them like have more secure income once they leave the place or whatever. And the staff were there, and there was this man who was just delighted to have us. He was so happy and smiley, and he gave me a hug. And when I hugged him, I slapped a sticker onto his back, and that made the people around him laugh. So then I would just periodically go pat him on the back and put another sticker, or sneak up and put one on his back. And by the time we left, I think he had 10 stickers on the back of his robe, and he had no idea because it wasn't for him. It was for the other people standing behind him watching, you know. And my favorite thing that happened in Morocco, we were at a different orphanage where they take the older children from the prior orphanage that I mentioned where the little ones were. When they reach a certain age, if they're special needs, this is where they then go. And so it was a lot of kids who were like strapped into walkers and wheelchairs, and people who would like need to have their diapers changed despite being like 12 years old. Like, that's painting a picture. And there was this one girl who, looking at her, I'm guessing she was like 13 or 14, who was sitting alone in a corner. And she clearly could not see or hear or speak, and didn't seem to be registering all of the havoc that was happening 3 feet from her, like clowns blasting music and running around and dancing and everything. So I sat with her and I gave her my hand, and she responded to that. And she knew that hands usually come in sets of 2. So she found my other hand, and she was guiding my hands to like where she wanted me to like stroke her body, like rub my arm, rub my neck. and everything. And that was what we did for the hour that we were there. I just held hands with this girl. And that's what clowning looked like there. She wouldn't have seen any faces I made. She wouldn't have heard anything I sang, you know, so that's what that was for me that day. So it can really run the gamut. It
So
can be anything.
it's really about once again, that human contact or connection, really. It doesn't always have to be the silly,
Absolutely.
playful, or loud. Yeah.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to walk into when you walk into a place dressed as a clown. You don't know what you're going to find and what will be needed.
So you
Yeah.
visited a lot of different places. Would you say, have there ever been, or how do you handle like issues with language barriers or any kind of cultural like issues where maybe they don't want you to do certain things, you know, or they have different rules that are different from America, things like that?
I am 100% in favor of language barriers. I don't want to be able to understand what these people are saying to me, and I don't want them to understand what I'm saying to them. It's so much more interesting that way, because if a kid comes up and is like, I want a sticker, I want a sticker, I want a sticker, you have to acknowledge what they're saying eventually, or you're a jerk. But if you don't understand them, you can just keep forcing them to dance with you. And vice versa, you know. So it kind of lets everyone off the hook in this really interesting, silly way. As far as cultural things, I don't know that it's really been a huge problem. There were very few situations in Morocco where they were like, hey, ladies, we got to cover our shoulders or whatever, because we're in a predominantly Muslim nation. I was really impressed by the tolerance there, because you'll see women who are in like full burqas where all you can see is their eyes. And then on the other side of the pool at the hotel, there's a lady visiting from Europe in her bikini. And they're both coexisting on the same patch of grass. So there seemed to be a pretty incredible tolerance there, at least in like day-to-day life, for differences. But also when you're dressed as a clown, you have permission to do most things. You know, like if you do something wrong, it's, oh, that was just part of my shtick. You know, I didn't realize that I'm not allowed to cross that barrier. I was just being a clown. Also, no habla inglés or whatever. So, oh well.
Once again, language barrier comes
freedom.
in handy, right?
Absolutely. I would never want to clown in an English speaking country. That would be annoying.
I get what you're saying, though. I understand that. Yeah. I totally do. So you said you do get some free time. So did you get to, on your different trips, Russia, Costa Rica, Morocco, did you get to see, I mean, from your pictures, it looked like very beautiful and interesting. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but I assume you got time to enjoy and really see things that were interesting to you.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like every meal for the most part is wonderful. They're going to make sure that wherever you go, you're getting to taste like the local cuisine. Like we ate lots of classic Moroccan food at, you know, places that are intended for tourists. And they do like build into the itinerary, like the must see things, which is good. And there's usually some downtime where you can, you know, take off with a group of whoever you want to hang out with and go see things. And they're pretty good about balancing all of that into it, which is wonderful. And then
That's
like
cool.
you get to like go to the museum as a group of clowns and see what happens there, you know. So that's that's even better.
Oh boy. How is, I mean, I don't want to sound ignorant with Russia because I'm sure there is beautiful architecture and things like that, but we tend to, I think a lot of us tend to have a negative or like, oh, I wouldn't want to go there, but I'm sure it's quite beautiful too. It has quite beautiful architecture and different things to see as well in
Oh my
Russia.
gosh. Russia was a feast for the eyes. And keep in mind, I went 11 or 12 years ago. So while we've never like had an affinity for Russia here in America, there wasn't this terrible war happening that's happening now.
Right.
And Russia trips are sadly on hold until that ends, which is a shame because they've been happening for decades, these clown trips to Russia. But the architecture over there is so excellent because it's like all of these wonderful churches that kind of look like a cross between Princess Jasmine's palace and a gingerbread house. Like that's how I would describe it, like Red Square and everything. It's so good. I don't love Russian food, but Russian architecture is on point. I'll take it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, good
What
stuff.
what was your favorite of all your trips, whether it was a favorite restaurant, a favorite moment, a favorite something you saw?
Um, favorite like touristy experience would probably be in Morocco. We got to go to the largest mosque in Africa, which is the third largest in the world.
Wow.
That was very, very cool, especially for me as someone who has an affinity for religion. As far as clowning moments go, my favorite is probably there was an orphanage in Russia, and maybe this is different now, but I doubt it. And I'm by no means an expert on Russian anything. But my understanding is that there is no abortion there. So there are a fuck ton of orphans. I think there were 3 million at the time, probably more now. And they live in orphanages depending on their situation. Like this orphanage is for fetal alcohol syndrome. This orphanage is for kids who are blind and deaf. This one is for kids who are born HIV positive. And there was one orphanage we went to, and it was explained to us ahead of time, like, you're not going to bring your cameras in here because these kids know what stealing is. But we'll have our official photographer. And they were special needs in some capacity. I'm sure there's a better word for whatever their situation was. But they explained to us what happens in these orphanages is they give the children medicine, air quotes, so that they'll take a nap every day, which is a very nice way of saying they drug them, not for any malicious reason, but because these are understaffed and underfunded places and nothing will get done. And those drugs affect them slowly but surely over time. So by the time they get to an adult orphanage, they're basically vegetables. And we were in an orphanage. These kids were like young teens, I want to say, probably like 11 to 15, something along those lines. And there was one little boy who was probably like 13, but mentally much, much, much younger, who was hugging me and wouldn't let go. And it was like, I don't know how to feel right now, like, because this kid mentally is seeming very, very little, but he's also got a big boy body. So I don't know if he's being creepy and I don't know what he's saying. So I'm not really sure like what my situation is here. And the photographer told me that he was saying, choose me, choose me, choose me.
Oh.
So that's like a moment that stays with me, like that. Whew, that's an intense one. That's probably my favorite clowning moment, was like recognizing the gravity of that little boy's situation. And while it wasn't what he was hoping for in having us there, it did kind of speak to like the hope and excitement of just having people from the outside who are full of good vibes coming in.
Yeah.
and goofing off and coloring with you for a while, like how truly valuable that is.
Yeah. Wow. So
Yeah,
that means a lot, obviously, to those kids. Yeah. Wow.
definitely. Yeah. That was
So
really heavy. Sorry.
yeah, no. I mean, that's just such a, like, what a moment. Like, and like you said, it explains the gravity of and those children, what they're all probably feeling and going through. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we get ready to wrap up, because I'm pretty much kind of toward the end of what I had intended to ask you about. The only
Sure.
other thing I was going to ask you about, and then I'll see if there's anything else you wanted to add. So I always find it
Mhm.
interesting, like when I read your posts and see where you're at. So I'm thinking to myself, and I know people probably ask me for the different things I've done too. It's like, you managed to make a living, you're paying your bills, but it's very interesting. I would say, are you always like hustling? Because it's like, wow, she's traveling, she's here, she's there. How did, like, that's pretty
Right.
interesting that you can make a living.
Yeah. And by make a living, let's let's remember everybody pays the piper somewhere. Um, I'm 33 and I live with my parents. So like I have very few expenses, which means that the money I make, and I do not make a lot of money, sadly, I am able to do very cool things with, whether that's putting it into visiting cults for my show or paying an embarrassing amount of money to swim with otters, which is something I did this summer, or traveling to wherever. Morocco was paid for. I had the money set aside and then things changed. So I spent it on other things. But then thanks to unemployment during COVID, I was able to set the money aside again. Because I was living at home and was very disciplined about it and put most of it into savings. Thank goodness. Lots to be grateful for there. Very, very privileged. But yeah, I live at home. So even though I don't make a lot of money, I'm not starving and I'm not paying rent. And if something disastrous were to happen, I have the safety net of mommy and daddy. And while it sucks to not be able to get laid sometimes, I think the many wonderful things that I get to do are probably, frankly, more wonderful than like some guy who doesn't understand what a clitoris is, which is the type of men I tend to find. So
Many of us find them.
everybody pays the piper somewhere.
Okay. And I get you. And I
Yeah.
want to say two things about that. One, we have similar
Yes.
situations in the sense that sounds like you have good supportive parents, which when I
Yes. And
left,
you clearly love and support your parents too.
and they've
Yes.
been wonderful. I was going to say they're the ones who I was able to leave my day job that paid, a good, quote unquote, good living or whatever, so that I could pursue certain things. And I am paying the bills, but there is a trade-off, as you're saying. But I love my freedom. I love that I can like kayak or run in the middle of the day. So I don't have a 9 to 5, but yeah, I mean,
Totally.
I don't have a ton of money, so I get you there. And I also want to apologize for something I said. Instead of making a living, you're doing interesting things. You're making a life. So I shouldn't have phrased it. It's not always about money. It's
So
not always.
profound. I love it. I love that. Thank you.
No, but it's true, because I'm
Yeah,
thinking
like
like I get it, because it's about the life, the quality, and the experiences. It's not always about money. So I shouldn't have said make a living, but I basically,
absolutely. And something that I think is not ideal about feminism is we're told you can do anything. And that is true. But there is also the caveat you can do anything, but you can't do everything. You know,
yeah,
you you can't. There are not enough hours in the day. There are not enough years in your life. You can't do everything. Everybody pays the piper somewhere.
yeah.
So do what you feel led to do to the best of your ability within your means,
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely. And that's well put, because it's true. But, I think we like to say these things, right? They look good on a t-shirt or a placard or,
Right?
if you have a Cricut, you can put it on anything, I guess. Cricut machine.
Absolutely. And I think that the choices you make in life, Janine, are marvelous, because you've got your normal job, whatever it is that you do, but you've had very cool side hustles with the wine thing. And I love seeing you follow your curiosity wherever it leads you, whether that's decorating corks and turning them into jewelry and Christmas tree ornaments, or interviewing your parents, or touring a winery, or exploring comedy, or interviewing someone like me. Like, I am here for it. You are so unapologetically being yourself and doing what you want to do, and I applaud it. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's so nicely said. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. But
I love seeing it. That's like my favorite thing to observe in the world, is people who are clearly doing what they want to be and should be doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. No, honestly, thank you so much for saying that. And that means a lot to me. It really does. But let's get back to you before we wrap up here. Is there anything? So I'm going to mention in the show notes about January 2024 to watch for your show. Anything else that you just wanted to share, even if it's just a little words of wisdom? I mean, you've said a lot that I've found interesting and appreciate. Anything else you'd want to say before we close here?
I guess the responsible thing to do would be to plug my website. I have a blog where I write about all sorts of bullshit that I get into. That's lisavanarsdale.wordpress.com. And there are links to most of the interviews that I've given about cuddling or cults or what have you, on the About Lisa page on that website. Also, I do not have a timeline for this yet, but I will be having a podcast about cults. It's already recorded. My producer needs to find time to distribute it, and it's going to be called Lisa Joins a Cult. And I don't know where it will be streaming or anything like that, but feel free to look for it.
No, that sounds
Hopefully
great.
It'll be out by the time anyone hears this. I have no idea. So look for that as well.
Okay.
If you want to hear about some crazy shit. Yes. Words of wisdom. I don't know. Follow your curiosity. Those are my words of wisdom.
I love that. No, I absolutely love that, because I've heard it said from other people too. And it's just so, I mean, when you're curious, you just keep learning throughout life. And I think that's great, because then you never become stagnant.
Yes. And I think curiosity and joy are, if not the exact same thing, peas in a pod at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Very well said. Very well said. And I will put a link to Lisa's blog site. And if we have more info by the time this airs, well, if you're listening, it's aired in thinking January, I will be sure to include as much info as I have at the time, but we'll be sure to watch for the show in 2024 and the podcast, which sounds really interesting too. Very cool.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate your time. I hope you have a good day tasting.
Thank you.
At work there.
Always.
And to my listeners, as I always say, I want to thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please share it, and please subscribe to the podcast. If you didn't, keep scrolling, because there are numerous podcasts out there. But I do like to say that I do thank you for your time that you've given me to listen. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass.